Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Debra Granik, Jennifer Lawrence, and this evening's guest moderator, Brian Brooks from IndieWire.
Hi there. Debra, this wasn't your first round at Sundance either. In fact, you stepped up to the awards podium in Park City once before, actually.
Yeah, for The Other Bone.
The Other Bone.
the first part of the Osteo trilogy.
Yeah, you won the Best Director prize for Down to the Bone, and that was 2004.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, how was it this year, and what was it? Was the experience like showing it at Sundance, and how were the audiences and so forth?
I think.
Was it your first time there?
Yeah, it was.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel that one thing that the audience at Sundance are willing to do early on is to let people know that they're enjoying the performances. I mean, that's something that is a way that. It's a good feeling at the beginning of the film being shown that's like a sure thing that people felt really like, oh God, we just saw some really solid work, and that was exciting. And we didn't, and not all of us knew who Jennifer and John are exactly. It took us a while, and it was exciting. It wasn't just a super familiar performer.
Right.
And I think the only thing I would say, just on the filmmaking side, that you guys know so deeply about, is that the second time, the stakes just feel so much higher on the auction block. You really, it was extremely helpful to get recognition the first time. I mean,
right.
In a way that I can't really say, how extreme that help is and that encouragement. And yet to go back twice and have a film that's deemed entirely non-commercial with absolutely no potential to ever have a life out in the world, that would have felt like a hard, really hard blow. So the feeling of that we had to find somewhere a distributor that was willing to stand up was an extreme tension of the week, I gotta say.
Right. Now, I read that you read the book Winter's Bone, and you had read it in one sitting. Is that correct? Yeah.
In Washington Square Park.
Tell our audience here, and then also the people who are listening through iTunes, what attracted you to the story? What moved you? And I'd also like to hear your thoughts on that too, Jennifer.
The female protagonist. I mean, in Daniel Woodrell's novel Winter's Bone, Ree Dolly is written in a really...
Ree Dolly is the character that Jennifer plays. Yes.
Yes. She is written in a way that it's very hard not to get caught up in her way that she navigates, in her mind, in her thoughts, what her moves are going to be, the resources that she has, just in her strength and her self-reliance. And I've been waiting, frankly, for a long time to come across in a book a protagonist that I could like this much. And then the other two outstanding parts of his novel was that the structure of it was hugely easily adaptable. It was written in a way that could, as I read it, I could conceive of it as being feasible on a low budget. And then it was in a region I didn't know, and that stoked my imagination.
Jennifer, maybe you can kind of just give it. People obviously haven't seen it yet, so maybe you can kind of just reveal some of the challenges that Ree faced in the story, and sort of the backbone of Winter's Bone.
That's a heavy, loaded question. She faces a lot of challenges that are far, far more than anybody her age should be facing. Her father is missing, and she has to find him, or her. Should we answer it together?
What?
She has to find her father, or her home is going to be taken away, and she has two younger siblings to raise. So she has to find him amidst a drug-ridden family, and doesn't take no for an answer, and gets into a lot of trouble.
So what did you guys do as far as getting to know the characters themselves? I mean, obviously, you said that it's an area that you weren't familiar with, and obviously, as a filmmaker, of course, and a storyteller, you want to get to know the characters even before you pick up that camera and so forth. So what did you do as far as tackling obviously you read the book, you loved it, but as far as getting to know them more deeply, what were some of the things that you did?
there were about, I would say, 5 scouts, and the scouts got deeper and deeper and deeper. The first one started with the author and meeting him and looking at locations that inspired his work, meeting people that could help us understand the meth problem in the area, a sheriff in another county, a folklorist, historian, musicians. We started to get pieces of information that we would never have known. Outside of the Ozarks history is not taught necessarily. You'd have to actually go seek it out. So we needed a feel for the land, both the physical land, the topography, and history. It made a big difference. Why certain things exist, why certain families have certain legacies of self-reliance. How did that happen? How did it happen against maybe the grain of other parts of the country? And it was also important to extensively be able to look at people's homes and the details of their daily life. So each visit was an attempt to get access, to meet someone, a local fixer who could then translate for us and help us actually take these visual notes. The DP, Michael McDonough, we would almost be taking like a visual diary. Every visit would be these studies of what the houses look like and could they be used, could we match them to the houses that were described in the book? And also, people's life experiences was very important for us to hear. What were their impressions of meth and how it had evolved over time, how you survive it, how you get past it, who they knew that had a brush up with it. That was important to put real life experience to what was written.
And Jennifer, I interviewed you actually for IndieWire like about a little over a month ago on the phone.
Oh, okay.
Okay, on the phone. But it was interesting. You'd mentioned to me that your mother had read the book.
Yes.
Before any of this had ever come up, and maybe
5 years before.
Maybe you can just kind of reveal the story about that, because I thought that was so interesting about how you said your mother said you have to do.
Oh yeah. Well, it was now 6 years ago. She read the book and she was like, "Jan, if they ever make this into a movie, you'd be perfect for it." And I didn't listen to her because she's my mother. And then 5 years later, I was like, "Remember that book?" I'm doing it. So, yeah, I know. She was right.
And it was interesting, too, because you told me that you had really pursued...
like a psycho. you can try to sugarcoat it.
But she is a very subtle psycho. Okay, she was having those emotions. She only revealed a very small fraction of them to me and Anne Roslini, who was casting the film with me and produced the film and co-wrote the screenplay. Anne and I, it registered that she was committed and was absolutely willing to show up and then come back across the country and meet us again, and that meant a huge deal. But we were not privy to the actual psycho thoughts that you were experiencing because you acted.
That makes it sound so much worse. I was just having psycho thoughts. I auditioned for it twice in LA, and then they said I was too pretty for it, so I flew out on a red eye, which will take care of that. And flew to New York and showed up with icicles hanging off my eyebrows and auditioned again, and it was hours. I mean, we spent hours just talking and doing improv and doing everything, and I my psycho thoughts were brewing, and then eventually I got the job.
And that allowed us to ponder the phrase, "Come the nut cuttin'."
Come the nut cuttin', yeah. We didn't figure out what that was until while we were filming, because we had trouble with some of the sayings. And so I called my dad, and he told me what it meant, castration. So we got that sorted out.
I mean, this part of the world actually isn't as foreign to you as it probably was to Debra going in. Is that fair to say or not fair to say? Because you grew up.
I grew up in Kentucky. Well, yeah. I mean,
I
I grew up in Louisville, so I didn't grow up in the conditions of that, but I did grow up in the South, so I was familiar with the dialogue and the accent, and it's all stuff that I've seen. It was definitely more helpful than being from New York.
Yeah.
Right. What drew you to Ree? I mean, why did you pursue it like a psycho?
I thought it was the best female role I ever seen, and I love that she doesn't take no for an answer, and she has a stubbornness that I felt like only I could possess. I don't know. I just loved it. And then once I met Debra, once I met Anne, and I heard their ideas, and it was such a beautiful script. I really just fell in love with all of it.
And where in Missouri did you guys shoot?
We shot in the 2 counties between Springfield and Branson in southern Missouri,
Okay.
Taney County and Christian County.
Uh-huh. And how long were you
and
there?
Taney is basically abuts North Arkansas, so
Okay.
it's really at the bottom of the state.
Uh-huh. And how long were you there?
We were there, the shoot was 24 and a half days, and that we were there 6 weeks prior for official pre-production, and then we had in the 2 years prior to that, the 6 or 7, I mean, it depends on when you start production, how many scouts. I mean, there was a scout right before, so these several trips over the 2 years before.
Mm-hmm.
So all in, I think we certainly got to know the coordinates of where we shot fairly well over these repeated visits. We saw it in all different seasons. Though we always knew it needed to be a winter film, we did see it in its glory in spring and in its luscious summertime.
I would imagine the people who live there might be protective of their hometown. What was their reaction to having you there, and like were they how much of the story were they aware of, and just having you all there? How did they react, and what was your welcome?
There was one kind of heartbreaking comment that was made to me early on. After the family that we approached a family that we found a property that would really be very suitable for the film. It was a family holler where there were enough houses from different members of the family that we could actually almost create a world, Ree's world. Her cousin could really be across the yard as it was described in the book. And the owner of the property owner turned to me and she had read the book and said, the only thing that feels so upsetting is that does it have to have meth in it? This has been a huge problem in our community, and it feels like such a raw bummer that yet another story. If that the word Ozarks is going to be associated to the word meth again. Right. And she said, but then she said, couldn't you just make it about moonshine? And I was like, I had a really powerful feeling of cringing because partly what I felt she was saying was like, well, since you're going to have to portray us as like hillbillies and you're going to have to already invoke a bunch of stereotypes, can't you just pick this more innocent one that's more historical than the current one? And after a lot of discussion, we really, and I feel like she wasn't just yesing me, I feel like it was a long discussion. In the end, she felt comfortable. She kind of discussed it with her entire family. And the fact that Ree is someone who is standing outside of that and saying, God, this is hurting my family. This is not about seeking meth. It's not the excitement that anyone thinks they're such a badass cook and they're actually going to make money from this. It's more that it's a depiction of a family that's gotten caught up in that life and it's eating them, it's hurting them. And so I think they felt like instead it was kind of a factual, if not factual, not a critique, but it's like showing it for what it is, a historical fact. Meth has hurt a huge amount of rural America for basically a decade and a half now. And they didn't mind that being stated as long as there was no glorification or sort of badass behavior around it, meaning on-screen presence of it being in any way aggrandized or made to seem interesting. And so in the end, I felt like that very serious hurdle was somehow thoroughly addressed.
I was going to actually ask you about the meth thing, whether or not you were tempted to not portray meth. I mean, you
Yes.
sort of anticipated my question. I mean, the one thing I did find rather interesting was Jennifer's character Ree, or at least as far in the movie, I didn't see any suggestion that she was ever a user of it, although she certainly had it around her a lot. Is that fair?
To say that it was so close to her that
It was so close to her, but she somehow was able to, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just her personality or, I don't know, maybe I didn't see that she was directly a part of the meth trade.
She was disgusted by it, but I blame a lot of her responsibility and her good decisions and everything on the 2 children, because it's hard to think about what a teenager would do if it was just their life and they had no parents and you could do anything. But she has 2 children that she knows are depending on her and that she knows would die without her, and she has to be their parent. And I think that Sunny and Ashley are her reasons for going the right way. Because a stubborn personality like that can go both ways, especially when you're 17 or a teenager. So I think mostly the children.
Deborah, I read the New York Times article for your review. Congratulations.
This just in?
It was just in. But earlier today, I actually read an LA Times article, which more it was an interview, I guess, with you. I just read it online today. I'm not sure when it actually came out. But in it, the writer said that while you were making the film, just reading here, that during the making of the film, you had changed the experience had changed your attitude toward firearms, hunting, and dietary habits. How so, and how?
I would say very concretely, I mean, I am such a product of the East Coast. I am a kind of a prototype of the Northeast Corridor, a certain kind of liberal politics, a certain kind of vegetarianism, and so I was stepping outside my zip code when I left New York and went to southern Missouri. I was stepping outside my market sector, clearly. But to not be glib about it, the kind of hunting that I was being shown for the first time in my life was a very pragmatic kind of hunting. It did not appear to be sport hunting. It appeared to be very functional hunting, hard work hunting that was then very integrated into the family's diet. The family I'm referring to became sort of the life models for most of our research. And 4 days a year in the winter are given off from public school so the children can help the families do hunting. Many people feel that they have, either factually or in their spiritual life, have a Native American ancestral background. It plays out in many different ways, certain attitudes about hunting that I felt like I was witnessing. It's a huge part of life, and there's nothing exotic. It's very rhythmic. And as I say, it's arduous. Hunting is an arduous thing. Standing in a deer stand for many, many hours in cold weather, there's some parts of that are, I would say, leave sport way behind. And then same thing with other parts of other wild game that's obtained to augment the diet. So firearms, I had seen very responsible teaching of the use of firearms for hunting among very young people. And I was very impressed with that. I was impressed that there was that level of trust.
With Ree is teaching her her younger brother and younger sister, and it's very, very much like an attention to being careful, like never point it at each other or something like that. Ever.
Right.
Sorry.
But like I struggle with, like, if you see something big and mean, use both barrels. I'm like, oh God, really, if it's a bear, try to like wave at it or do anything but fire. But what I'm trying to say is that the hunting was of a different nature than I had ever been exposed to, and so were many, many other things. And so yeah, if you leave an area that you are habituated to and know everything, and are ingrained with attitudes, you do have to open up and see what else, what other perspective that you can look. And I felt like the whole crew probably experienced that along, we as a group.
Right, and that was sort of the case then with dietary thing. Did you
have to sample
some
deer
things
jerky?
that you weren't probably so used to?
Where was I when you did that?
Michael was usually the beef eater, if you will. he
didn't.
Well,
you ate meat?
Well, we at the first visit, it was important to be cordial, and I didn't want to. They already thought I was a weirdo as a city slicker, and they already were just shocked at how few skills I had for any form of living off the land. So I had to buck up. That was, it was important. I mean, when I got back to New York, part of it was in my pocket.
Look on your face, Jennifer. It's so funny. It's priceless.
I'm sorry.
Out there in iTunes land, it's pretty priceless.
No, at sometimes, given our age
just
difference,
gave the Pope a cigarette. Like,
well, I would get dogmatic. Even though I try not to be dogmatic, but you asked me.
No, you're
one.
a flexitarian.
I'm flexitarian.
She's
exactly.
flexible. Now she is.
So Jennifer, you've in your relatively short career, I guess. That's fair to say. Okay, but you've managed to win some acting prizes. Let's see, I wrote this down here. You won an acting award at the LA Film Festival for the Poker House, and then you also won a prize in Venice for The Burning Plane. And I have to say, you did just a marvelous job in this film. And I was just curious, how do you wrestle up your emotion? I mean, there was this one scene, and I don't want to give it away because it's pretty intense. It's very, very intense, where you're on the lake and you have to put your hand in the water to grab something, which I won't mention. But it's really, really unbelievably intense and just amazing. And so, how did you wrestle that up, or what do you do, or do you? I don't know.
It's very hard to explain, and most of it's instinctual, so it's hard to put into words. I'm not a method actor, so I wasn't. Yeah, it's hard to explain. And the more I talk, the more I'm gonna I might watch this later and cringe. So it's hard to explain, and it's mostly just kind of instinctual.
Actually, it's interesting because Jen and I literally moments before we began talking, we were talking about this very question.
I get it all the time, and I don't know how to answer it.
It's asked, and it's so understandable. It's absolutely a curiosity that all of us who watch a strong performance have. What is that actor doing to bring that about, to conjure what they need to conjure? And in a very recent moment where Jen and I were together just a day ago, and it dawned on me that I think actors that don't have a method that they can name, that people can recognize, I don't mean like a brand, I'm just talking about either a school or a kind of training, it becomes a very hard question. Mm-hmm. So we were searching for a way to say, that is hard to answer. It's something that's inside me, she was saying inside herself, but it's very hard to put words to it. And so I'm glad you asked it, and yet it's kind of a search. It's a search to sort of how to answer that in a way that doesn't feel like she's forced to explain something that is hard to put in words. So I'm joining you in that.
We're still trying to find the answer, as you can see right now.
But acting is something that you long wanted to do. Is that correct?
It wasn't. Not until it became a possibility. I mean, I grew up in Kentucky, so that it was never really a possibility. I mean, I was always an actress. I came out of the womb like da 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 da. But yeah, it wasn't until I was 14 that I read my first script when I came to New York on spring break, and that's a long story. But and it was the first thing that I've ever fully understood, and I just felt like, I wasn't a good student, I wasn't a good athlete, I wasn't really good at a lot of things, but I understood this and I understood that, and it was the first time I was ever told I was like the best at anything, and I just had this feeling I had to do it. So that was late. I mean, it was almost 15 or something, but I was always, acting and crying and sobbing and then laughing. Like, I was crazy, so it was meant to be.
I was just curious because I read somewhere that the accent that you use in this film, it wasn't too hard of a stretch. It's just as far as being able to get used to the accent. Was that correct?
Yeah, of course. Well, I had a mini freak out before we started filming, because Debra was nice enough to send me recordings. She interviewed people and recorded the voice, and the accent was different. Anytime I think, because I haven't lived in Kentucky for a long time, so anytime my accent, I think accent, it goes straight to Kentucky, and the Ozark accent I didn't realize is very different. So, but I didn't realize, that once I got there and I heard it, it came so naturally that I didn't even have to think about it.
When you started working outside of Kentucky, did you have an accent, and were you compelled by people to not use it?
I was saying howdy to cab drivers to get them to stop. But yeah, it slowly it went away. I'm a product of my environment, I suppose. So yeah, it went away.
Okay. You shot on red camera. Is that correct? I read. Okay. Maybe you can explain to the people listening on iTunes and the audience what that is and why you decided to do that.
The red camera is the yes camera. I need to talk to some people in that company. I'm promoting it right and left. I hope there's no problems politically, emotionally, anything. But the camera is this very, very powerful recording device. It's got the same resolution as all the big, I don't know why I'm using weaponry imagery, but it's got all the resolution of the big guns, and it's a democratic device. It's many, many DPs that we all know and love to work with own them. Getting them from rental houses, your package all of a sudden is like an affordable package, and they're common now. They're around. The company is kind of a weird, I don't know, they're kind of a mysterious entity, but they're cranking them out. They try to improve them. their Lutz tables are not very functional, according to Michael McDonough, the lookup table. That didn't bother me. He does such good work. I'm like, you don't need that. You never needed it before. You don't need it now. Do your beautiful work. But hardy device. It has a couple funky little things that it has. Like it has a little. It takes arbitrary breathing time. It shuts down sometimes. That wasn't too often. Otherwise, ones and zeros. After billions and billions of them recorded over 24 and a half days, they all arrived in New York through a very arduous workflow. And then Final Cut Pro was used as the end editing program. And, I think we felt, visually we felt very excited and rewarded by the use of that camera.
Oh, I thought you were about to say something. Okay.
I don't know.
So music in the film is beautiful, and I think it provides some moments of levity in what is obviously a very intense story. What were you looking for, and maybe you can give some backstory on the music that you chose.
The film originally did not have music in it, and through the initial visit and then subsequent visits, the irresistible nature of the music began to work its way, and we had the very wonderful experience on the very first visit to meet Meredith Sisko, who just bombed in here from Missouri just now. She's in the audience with us tonight, and she sang a song that really
You did a wonderful job, by the way. It was really beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna fly the mic down to her in a second.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say that a song she sang stayed in our mind, and as the visits ensued, the fact that we were hearing music in a very frequent and unannounced way, we would literally trip upon music making, which almost felt like a fantasy about the Ozarks, but it was actually something that we were finding that was borne out in reality. So, in that sense, we would have been fools to negate that part or to not include that. Also, as you're right, it is lyrical. That is where music is medicine. Music soothes. Music tells sad elegies, ballads. It also tells beautiful, hard, and difficult, sharp things about life and about existence. So, the film really, we thought, would benefit from the inclusion. And as I say, it would almost be like a disservice to create a film in this region and not have that be a part of it. And I just wanted to fly the mic in so that you could just hear great. An insight about Meredith. I would love it if you just would speak about just how you had some of the choices you made with some of the hymns and some of the songs that you selected.
Well, I followed your instruction. You may not have remembered it as instruction, but they would call and say, "We need something like a hymn that's kind of sad and speaks to the situation." And then tell me the situation. I said, "Well, what about farther along?" And they said, "Well, we've not heard that." So I'd take up my Zoom recorder and sing it into the recorder, and then send them the MP3 file. And I did the same with Missouri Waltz. They wanted to know what it sounded like, and I said, well, first of all, it sounds really racist. And they said, well, could you fix it? And I said, well, maybe. So I got it up on the computer and started messing with the words and taking out the things that were blatantly offensive. And it came up with something, and I picked up the Zoom recorder and sang it into the recorder, and then converted that WAV file to an MP3 for people. Converted from a great big file to a little bitty one that I could send on email, and send it to them, and then erase that disc because I was using it for other things, and that same clip is what starts the movie. We didn't have the WAV file anymore, so they just went with what they had, and I don't know how many pieces of professional work ever start with an MP3 file, but that one did.
How did you guys find each other?
We were introduced by the author of the novel, Daniel Woodrell. Yes, he lives in the same town as Meredith, and he had known her for a lot of years. And when we had said, "Is there any chance we could hear some music while we're down here?" One night when we're actually chilling, could we hear some music? And he knew that she and her and some fellow musicians had a practice. It was a Thursday night, and so they allowed us to be there. So that was the introduction. That was how we met her.
All right. I'd like to get to some questions from the audience.
If you just raise your hand, we'll come over for the mic for the
Hi,
podcast.
guys.
There we go. We have one all the way back here.
Congratulations, ladies, on the energy surrounding this project. But this question is for Debra. Can you talk to me about your process a little bit, and how did you get the job after you read the book? Did you option the book? Did the book writer say, "Oh, I got to get this filmmaker to make it"? What was that whole process like for you?
Wait, let me make sure I understood the question. You asked, did we option the book?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And that the book was circulating pre-publication, and we did get a chance to read it during that time. And because we liked it immediately in a very powerful way, we really did try to act on it super quickly. We didn't deliberate on it. We asked God, could we make an overture to him? Can we tell Daniel Woodrell that we're interested? And then he had actually seen Down to the Bone, my previous film, through Netflix. Thank goodness, for Netflix. And the conversation, it was like I didn't have to make a lot of disclaimers about the kind of film I was imagining. I didn't have to sort of introduce myself in some, with all the adjectives of scrappy, rogue, all these qualifications of what kind of film or filmmaker I am. He got it. And the second part of your question is sort of the process of actually putting the film together, or more
so about the screenplay. How long did it take to write? Did the writer like your first version? Did you go back and forth? That whole thing.
I co-wrote the screenplay with Anne Rosalini, who produced the film, and the writing of that screenplay was very quick. The book is written in a very taut way already. The structure was there, and that's like my weakest link. I'm such a slice of life person. I'm such a daily life person. I can watch a film, I can watch the kind of European film where, people prepare meals in real time and, do a lot of really daily life things. I have a huge patience for that. That is sort of my proclivity. And here I was with a book that had like really well done structure. So that alleviated some of the, I feel like the really arduous and confounding part of screenwriting for me, which is making sure the structure is really sound. And Daniel was not heavily involved with the actual adaptation process. We had interesting discussions. Sometimes we would call him to actually confer with him if we didn't understand something. But in some sense, he knew, and we'd already told him that our adaptation would be very close to his novel, which it is. So in that sense, there was no, given the distance we had between us, there was no heavy conferencing on the actual script as it evolved.
We have another one right over here in the second row.
My question specifically, it's also to Debra, but it has more to do with the preparation of your actors when it comes to different roles that you have in your films. Like, how are you as a director when it comes to the relationship that you have with your actors?
When it comes with how I work with them? Yeah. I think this is something I learned early on, but it was definitely taught to me. It's not something I knew. This was instilled in me through different settings where I did get a chance to experiment with scenes and do direct scenes and workshops and whatnot. And that was, actors come with so much that the first, not assessment, but the first steps are just to already see what they're bringing. And when actors have put a lot of thought into something or are passionate about a role, it's already 97%. Because you can't, a director can't extrude that from someone. A director can't make someone like a role or be interested in a role. Can't make someone be interested in a certain kind of other person's life experience. That has to come from them. So what I feel like a lot of what I do is, sometimes I feel like a director has a very powerful relationship with the editor and with the editing room in mind. Okay, sometimes when the scene's going really well, you do get greedy. Okay, so you've got you've done a safety. And then sometimes in a good way, you're like, let me also get a variation. She did this with her eyes in the first 4 takes. Let's try one where she absolutely averts her eyes and won't look at him. So it's like, it's sometimes you don't have a good plan and you feel raw. You're standing there and you're not sure what more the scene needs or what it could be different. And then also cultivating the sense of when is it just right? When do you back off and leave it and just say it's working as is? And to muck with it would be to wreck it. So, I feel like every scene, I've never felt relaxed during one scene ever, except maybe the lyrical stuff between you and the children, where like whatever way it jumped, it was going to be good. You've got these great ingredients. 3 people under the age of 20 with real tasks to do. It's going to be good, So I would say that I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not like I develop a system that I can use and deploy each time. Each blocking is different, and the circumstances. We were in some very squishy spaces. That already is just a formidable thing to work with, and how to make that work on the crew level and on the actual mechanics of the filmmaking.
Jennifer, do you have any thoughts on working with Debra, formulating your character, and so forth on the set?
Debra asks questions, which is unfortunately very rare with directors, and hardly anything went into the film that wasn't authentic that she didn't ask. Many, many questions of, would you say this? Is this realistic? Would a woman do this? And she has a very calming presence, which is very important. If anybody's planning on being a director, to be level, to never be too excited and to never be too down, because it's such a stressful environment. And there are so many emotions flying everywhere, but everybody is always reliant on the director. If the director's in a bad mood, everybody's in the bad mood, and vice versa. And Debra was never in either. She was always level, and she asks questions. It actually doesn't make sense that you're a director because you have those two qualities.
But you weren't there. I had 2 bad nights. The night,
the 4 a.m. I wasn't there.
4 a.m. in the bushes when we were supposed to drive Teardrop's car off the side of the road.
Oh, I heard that story.
Yeah, that was a bad night for me. Especially when the car stopped actually starting.
Wait, I was there, right? And then I left.
I think you were. Yeah. And so I just want to say that.
Yeah.
That's a generous comment.
Nobody's ever going to be. Well,
right, no one can be. But I
for
was
the most
saying,
part, try to.
Can't say never.
Be like that.
Maya knows 2 films together, and she knows there's some really gnarly moments where there is total collapse of the ability to be a human being.
Other questions? One more? Okay.
Hi. So I haven't seen the film, so I apologize if this is helplessly
Well, actually, I was going to say that
speculative.
it comes out on Friday, right? Friday
Tomorrow,
which is Friday.
Around the corner.
Limited at New York and LA at first.
Yeah,
I believe it's
wide on the 25th.
In Fayetteville.
Okay. And from roadside attractions, but I'll say that again. But sorry, go ahead.
So it sounds as if the film is like very location and culturally specific, and I'm wondering what the process was of coming back to New York to edit the film, and whether you made trips back there, or how disconnected that was actually from the rest of the process of making the film. Does that make sense?
You mean, did Jen travel, or did she stay the whole time?
No, for you as the filmmaker. Whether once you got back to New York for the edit, I mean, did you make further trips? How long an editing process was that, and did that still feel connected to the culture that the film was set in?
We didn't have pickups on this shoot, so after principal photography wrapped, there were many months between going back. I did speak to people on the phone very much. It was important for the family that was the core family that assisted us and worked with us, for them to know the progress of the film. And however, as the film got closer to completion on the editing side, there were a whole bunch of sounds that we were missing. Damien Volpe was the sound designer, and he said, we need crows, we need gravel, he had a list of all the sounds of the world of Ree's universe. And he said, I'm not using crows from my sound library. You're going to go down and get some crows from the location. And we had a few lines that we had to get. We had animal sounds of all kinds, gunshots we needed. So there was this list, and that brought me down right close to locking picture. And we went down, just me and a sound recordist, and one of the producers of the film went down, and we were able to get those sounds. And that was it was really rich to touch base after having not been there. And then we have been there since. We brought the film there in last month, in the middle of May. But there were disconnects by coming back in New York, absolutely. And we felt like there couldn't be too long an interval between these trips. And then when they were long, we actually had to write letters to quite a few of the families we were working with, just to really like promise them that we weren't just blowing smoke, that we were going to come back.
I saw there was another question. Or did you have one? Okay. Or I can go.
My question has more to do with your process as a storyteller. I haven't seen your other film, but I have a recollection of it, and it seems, in terms of the colors, in terms of just the pace that you take when it comes to storytelling, it seems to be similar. And I was wondering, what are the themes or ideas that you find yourself portraying or even pursuing when it comes to you being a storyteller?
That's a rich question. I feel like I am very open to a wide range of stories, and life experiences lead you to interests that you didn't know you had. Hearing music that I hadn't been exposed to before the making of this film got me very hooked on observing the process of musicians, watching them play, the photogenic qualities of being around musicians, and what it takes to practice, what it takes to get good, what it takes to be on the road. That led us to a story that featured the lives of musicians, very workaday lives of musicians, not a story of musicians as seeking fame, or not maybe what I would call almost like the Hollywood version of that story. So that was not a story that I knew I was interested in until I got involved with the most recent film. But in general, I am drawn to stories that are outside of my own lived experience. I know one narrow path of who I am, my economic background, my East Coast geography, my social class, my race. Everything about me is one path, and I'm very curious about lives in this vast country that I don't ever get a chance to know about unless I go forward and actually get a chance to. Usually a project is what brings you to that. It's not just a random set of travels. It's like you have to actually go seeking a story that other people would help inform.
And then maybe along those lines, what stories or roles are you attracted to, Jennifer?
I feel the way about movies I do about music. I like anything if it's good. Yeah, it's a pretty short answer. I mean, I really don't prefer one or the other. It's just, this was a good movie.
Great. I'm just kind of curious what you guys have coming up. Also, I think I know that you're working on a film with someone named Jodie Foster.
Yes, it's coming out in November. It's called The Beaver. It's with Jodie Foster and Mel Gibson and Anton Yelchin. It's kind of a very dark, weird comedy.
And Jodie Foster directs, correct?
Jodie Foster directs and co-stars, yeah.
Right. And I'm sure you've been busy with this. Do you have something on the pipeline, or
I feel like
TBD?
I feel like what I've done is I've ignited 6 burners, and I look at these 6 glorious stories, or if maybe it's 4 burners. 2 might be very unlikely, and I'm having trouble figuring out to put some either in Tupperware for a minute, and focus on one. So it's hard. Sometimes on a good day, you realize there really are a wealth of stories. On a grim day, and with a lot of naysaying around that happens in the financial world, you don't feel like there are many stories. But we now have to actually commit to something, and want to.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A round of applause, please, for Jennifer Lawrence, Debra Granik.